I was 30 seconds away from boarding Flight 347 to Denver, my carry-on already through security, my boarding pass clutched in my trembling hands. But fate, or maybe intuition, stopped me cold in the long-term parking lot of Chicago O'Hare. I had forgotten Edward's original will, the real one, not the photocopy I kept in my kitchen drawer. I thought I'd dash home, grab it, and catch the next flight to my sister's mountain cabin for Thanksgiving. 5 minutes, maybe 10 at most. But what I walked into that November afternoon was a conversation that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my only son. The front door whispered open when I turned the key. I didn't announce myself. Something in the atmosphere felt wrong, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood as I moved through the foyer. The voices drifted from Edward's old study, low and calculated, the kind of careful conversation that stops when someone unexpected walks in. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, my breath caught in my throat. If she's showing signs, we can build a solid case, came a voice I recognized with devastating clarity. Marcus. My son Marcus, 39 years old, a successful financial advisor who I'd raised alone after Edward's passing. She's 77, Marcus, replied another voice. With the right documentation, proving diminished capacity shouldn't be difficult. That was Victoria, the estate attorney Marcus had introduced as someone to help sort through Dad's complicated affairs. I'd trusted her recommendations, signed papers she'd explained in gentle, patronizing tones. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. They were discussing guardianship. They were discussing me. Marcus continued, his voice gaining confidence. I've been documenting everything. She repeats herself constantly, forgets appointments, barely managed her taxes last year. I had to take over her banking just to keep her accounts straight. When did kindness become ammunition? I wanted to storm in, to demand an explanation, but something deeper held me back. Instead, I crept away, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my car keys. The woman who had worked double shifts as a museum curator to pay for his medical school, who had sacrificed her own retirement dreams so he could graduate debt-free, was now being cataloged like a specimen in a case study. As I sat in my car staring at my own front door, a terrible realization washed over me. This wasn't new. The careful management of my life, the gradual erosion of my independence, it had been happening so slowly, so gently, that I'd mistaken it for love. But how do you fight someone who's convinced the world they're saving you? I didn't return to the airport. I didn't call my sister. Instead, I found myself driving through downtown Chicago, past neighborhoods where Edward and I had dreamed of retiring together. The city blurred past my windows as my mind raced, processing not just what I'd heard, but all the signs I'd ignored. That's when I remembered Dr. Sarah Chin. Sarah had been Edward's neurologist during his final months, but more than that, she'd become a friend. She was 45 now, a brilliant physician who specialized in cognitive assessment and elder advocacy. More importantly, she was someone who had seen me at my strongest, coordinating Edward's care, managing his complex medical needs, making impossible decisions with clarity and grace. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and dialed her number. Margaret. Her voice was warm, surprised. How are you holding up? Sarah, I need your professional opinion on something, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. And I need to know if you'd be willing to help me prove my own competency. The pause was brief. What's going on? I told her everything. When I finished, there was another pause, longer this time. Margaret, what they're attempting is called soft guardianship manipulation. It's more common than you'd think, and it's exactly why I started doing independent cognitive assessments. Can you meet me tomorrow? Bring any recent medical records you have. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, hope mixed with righteous anger. Marcus thought he was orchestrating a careful takeover, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail about his mother. I'd spent 30 years organizing historical archives. I knew how to build an airtight case. The next morning, I moved through my house with new purpose. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. In the back of Edward's desk, behind old tax returns and faded insurance policies, I found a manila folder labeled Margaret, Important. Inside was a letter in Edward's careful handwriting, dated just 6 months before his death. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong with the plans we made. I've seen how Marcus looks at the estate paperwork, how he questions your decisions.
Trust your instincts.
You've always been sharper than you give yourself credit for. The numbers in the blue ledger will tell you everything you need to know about recent account changes. Remember, you taught him how to think critically. Don't let him use those skills against you. Love always, Edward. My hands trembled as I opened the blue ledger. Edward had meticulously documented every financial transaction, every conversation with Marcus about simplifying my affairs, every instance where my son had overruled my decisions for my own good. The paper trail was damning, and it was all in Edward's handwriting. I spent the afternoon creating my own documentation system. I photographed every page of Edward's notes, scanned bank statements showing unauthorized changes to my accounts, and compiled a timeline of Marcus's gradual assumption of control over my life. By evening, I had built what any investigator would recognize as a pattern of financial manipulation. But evidence was only half the battle. I needed allies. Dr. Sarah Chen's office was in a medical complex I'd never visited, but walking through those halls felt like coming home. The antiseptic smell, the quiet efficiency, the sense of serious work being done, it reminded me of the hospital where I'd advocated so fiercely for Edward's care. Sarah's assessment was thorough and, frankly, humbling. For 3 hours, she put me through cognitive tests that would have challenged someone half my age. Memory recall, problem solving, spatial reasoning, financial comprehension. She tested everything Marcus claimed was failing. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. Margaret, your cognitive function is not just normal for your age, it's exceptional. Your working memory scores are in the 95th percentile. Your financial reasoning is sharper than most of my colleagues half your age. She paused, her expression growing serious. What your son is attempting isn't just unethical, it's fraud. She handed me a formal cognitive assessment report, notarized and sealed. This document states unequivocally that you possess full mental capacity to make your own decisions. But Margaret, she leaned forward, you need legal representation. Have you considered calling Eleanor Richmond? Eleanor Richmond. I hadn't spoken to Eleanor in 5 years. Not since Edward's funeral, but we'd been close friends during our university days. She'd gone on to become one of Chicago's most respected elder law attorneys, known for her fierce advocacy and her zero tolerance for family exploitation. She owes me a favor, I said, surprising myself with a smile. I helped her pass organic chemistry. Eleanor arrived at my house the next morning like a force of nature. At 52, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades fighting battles others were afraid to engage. She wore a sharp navy suit and carried a briefcase that looked like it could double as a weapon. We sat in my kitchen while I laid out everything: Edward's documentation, the recordings I'd made. Yes, I'd started recording every conversation with Marcus, the financial irregularities, and Dr. Chen's assessment. Eleanor's expression grew darker as she reviewed each piece of evidence. Margaret, this is textbook elder abuse. He's been systematically isolating you from your support systems, assuming control of your finances, and documenting manufactured evidence of incompetency. She looked up from the papers. The question is, how do you want to handle this? I want him to confess, I said. I want him to admit what he's been doing, and I want it recorded. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. Then we're going to give him exactly what he thinks he wants. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Eleanor would prepare papers that appeared to grant Marcus exactly what he'd been maneuvering toward: temporary guardianship over my affairs. But hidden within the legal language were clauses that would actually strengthen my position and create automatic reviews of his actions. More importantly, the signing would take place in Eleanor's office, where every word would be recorded and witnessed. I called Marcus that afternoon, my voice carefully modulated to sound tired, resigned. Marcus, honey, I've been thinking about what you said, about getting help with my finances. I let my voice crack slightly. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time. The relief in his voice was audible. Mom, you're making the right choice. I've already spoken with Victoria about the paperwork. I've found an attorney, I said. Eleanor Richmond. She comes highly recommended for these situations. I could practically hear him calculating whether to object, but the promise of getting what he wanted won out. That's fine, Mom. Whatever makes you comfortable. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Eleanor's office was in a high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan, all polished wood and subtle power. When Marcus and Victoria arrived, they brought thick folders and satisfied expressions. I sat in the chair Eleanor had positioned for me, playing the role of confused elderly woman to perfection. I fumbled with my reading glasses, asked for clarification on simple terms, and looked to Marcus with the trusting eyes of someone grateful to be taken care of. For 30 minutes, they explained the papers with condescending patience. I was signing over financial power of attorney, agreeing to assisted living arrangements, and authorizing Marcus to make medical decisions on my behalf. It's for the best, Mom, Marcus said, his hand on my shoulder. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. I picked up the pen with shaking hands. Then I set it down. Before I sign, I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. I have a question, Marcus. The room went still. When did you start planning this? His face went pale. Planning what, Mom? I reached into my purse and pulled out Edward's letter, placing it on the conference table. Your father knew. He documented everything. Every conversation where you questioned my judgment, every time you overruled my decisions, every account you accessed without permission. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Furthermore, I continued, standing up, I've been recording our conversations for weeks, including the one where you discussed my supposed incompetency with Victoria in my own home. I nodded to Eleanor, who produced a digital recorder and pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room. If she's showing signs, we can build a solid case. The color drained from his face entirely. Finally, I said, pulling out Dr. Chen's assessment, I think you should know that my cognitive function has been professionally evaluated. I'm not just competent, I'm exceptionally sharp for my age. Have you ever watched someone's entire worldview collapse in real time? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus looked at Victoria, who was studying her hands with sudden fascination. He looked at Eleanor, who was watching him with the expression of a prosecutor who just caught a witness in perjury. Finally, he looked at me. Mom, we were just trying to protect you. From what? I asked. From my own life? From my own decisions? From my own money? What followed wasn't the dramatic confrontation you might expect. Instead, it was something more devastating, a quiet, thorough dismantling of every justification Marcus had built for his actions. Eleanor walked through each document in his folder, explaining how they would have stripped me of virtually every right while leaving me liable for any financial losses he incurred. Victoria, to her credit, looked genuinely horrified as the implications became clear. I need to withdraw from this case, Victoria said quietly. This isn't what I signed up for. Marcus tried several times to defend his actions, to frame them as concern rather than exploitation, but each attempt only highlighted how calculated his approach had been. Finally, I spoke. Marcus, I raised you to be better than this. I worked 60-hour weeks, so you could have every opportunity. I taught you to think critically, to question assumptions, to stand up for what's right. I paused, letting the weight of disappointment settle. I never taught you to use those skills against me. He broke down then, not dramatically, but quietly. Years of resentment spilled out. Resentment that I'd remained sharp while his father declined. Anger that I wasn't the grateful, helpless widow he'd expected. Frustration that managing my life had become more complicated than he'd anticipated. But here's what I learned that day. Understanding someone's motivation doesn't mean excusing their actions. The legal resolution was swift. Eleanor filed complaints with the state bar regarding Victoria's conduct and ensured that Marcus's access to my finances was permanently revoked. More importantly, she helped me establish ironclad protections against future manipulation. But the personal resolution was more complex. Marcus and I began family therapy with Dr. Chen's recommendation, a specialist in family dynamics and elder care. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend quickly. But over months of difficult conversations, we began to rebuild our relationship on terms that respected my autonomy. The most significant change came in the form of Sarah Chen's daughter, Lisa, who was finishing her master's in social work. Lisa moved into my guest room, not as a caretaker, but as a graduate student who needed affordable housing while completing her thesis on elder empowerment. Her presence transformed the house from a place where I waited for decline into a home where 2 generations of women supported each other's growth. As I write this, sitting in the study where I once overheard my son planning my legal demise, I'm struck by how common the story is. Eleanor tells me that family financial exploitation affects 1 in 9 older adults, but most cases never come to light because the victims don't know their rights or don't have the resources to fight back. What if your own family is your biggest threat to independence? The signs were there for months. The gradual assumption of responsibilities I hadn't asked for help with, the gentle corrections of my memory, the subtle suggestions that I was becoming a burden. The erosion of autonomy, disguised as care. But here's what I want you to understand. Aging doesn't mean accepting helplessness. Needing occasional support doesn't mean surrendering control. And family love doesn't justify financial manipulation. If this story resonates with you, perhaps it's because you've witnessed similar dynamics in your own family. Maybe you've seen an aging parent gradually lose control over their own life, or maybe you've watched adult children justify increasingly invasive help as necessary care. At what point does protection become control? When does family concern cross the line into exploitation? How do we balance genuine care with respect for autonomy? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're essential ones. Because the truth is, any of us could find ourselves in my position. Underestimated, manipulated, and fighting for the right to remain the author of our own story. If there's one thing I want you to take from this experience, it's this: document everything. Keep your own records, maintain your own relationships, and never be so grateful for help that you stop asking questions. Create your own support network before you need it. Maintain relationships with people who see you as capable, not fragile. Keep your legal and financial documents in order and make sure you understand every change that's made to your affairs. Most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. If someone's help comes with strings attached, question their motives. If you're being told you're not capable of making your own decisions, get a second opinion. The months following the confrontation weren't easy. Rebuilding trust with Marcus required both of us to examine painful truths about our relationship. But something unexpected emerged from that process, a deeper, more honest connection than we'd ever had. Marcus had to confront his own fears about aging and mortality, his unconscious assumption that his financial success meant he knew what was best for everyone around him. I had to acknowledge that my fierce independence sometimes prevented me from accepting help I actually needed. The difference now is that help comes with respect, not condescension. When Marcus handles complex financial transactions for me, it's because I've asked him to, not because he's assumed I can't. When he expresses concern about my health or safety, we discuss solutions together rather than him implementing them unilaterally. True care empowers. It doesn't diminish. Today, my house bustles with purposeful activity. Lisa's thesis research has evolved into a community resource center for elder advocacy, operating from my converted garage. Eleanor stops by monthly for coffee and legal updates. Dr. Chun has become a close friend who challenges me to hiking adventures that would tire people half my age. Marcus visits weekly, but now he comes as a son, not a manager. We've learned to navigate the complex terrain between independence and interdependence, between confidence and humility. The guest room that once sat empty now hosts a rotation of women, other targets of family financial manipulation who need a safe place to rebuild their legal standing. Eleanor calls it the Underground Railroad for elder independence, and the joke isn't entirely untrue. This story doesn't end with my personal victory because the problem is far bigger than one family's dysfunction. Every week, I meet women who are fighting similar battles, men whose adult children have convinced them they're incompetent, families where good intentions have evolved into financial abuse. The systems that should protect us often fail because they're built on outdated assumptions about aging and incapacity. Too many legal and medical professionals still equate advanced age with diminished capability, making it easier for manipulation to occur unchallenged. But change is possible when we refuse to accept powerlessness as inevitable. As you've followed this journey, you've likely found yourself evaluating the relationships in your own life. Perhaps you've recognized concerning patterns, or maybe you've realized you need to have difficult conversations with aging parents or relatives. How do we distinguish between genuine decline and manufactured helplessness? What's the difference between offering support and assuming control? How can families navigate the transition of capabilities without sacrificing dignity? These questions don't have simple answers, but they're worth asking. Because the alternative, the slow, steady erosion of autonomy disguised as love, is devastating in ways that extend far beyond financial loss. 6 months after that pivotal Thursday in Eleanor's office, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Victoria, the attorney who had been helping Marcus build his case against me. She had left her firm and started a new practice focused exclusively on elder advocacy. "Your case changed how I see my profession," she wrote. "I realized I had been enabling the very abuse I thought I was preventing. Thank you for showing me what real advocacy looks like." It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and most vulnerable, our actions ripple outward in ways we might never know. Standing up for my own dignity wasn't just about me. It was about every other person who might find themselves in a similar situation. If this story has stayed with you, perhaps it's because you recognize the universal struggle for dignity, autonomy, and respect that transcends age, family dynamics, and financial circumstances. Maybe you've felt that particular silence that comes with being underestimated, dismissed, or managed by people who claim to love you. You are not required to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. You are not obligated to accept help that comes with conditions that strip away your agency. You deserve to be seen as capable until proven otherwise, not the reverse. The strength I found didn't come from anger or revenge. It came from refusing to accept someone else's definition of my limitations. It came from building alliances with people who saw my full capability, not just my areas of vulnerability. If you're facing a similar situation, know that you have more power than you realize. Document everything, seek professional support, build your own network of advocates. Don't let anyone convince you that accepting help means surrendering control. And if you're watching someone else navigate these challenges, remember that true support amplifies someone's existing strengths rather than highlighting their weaknesses. 3 months after the confrontation in Eleanor's office, Marcus made one final attempt to override my decisions. He filed emergency guardianship papers, claiming I had become dangerously unstable and was making irrational financial decisions by donating $15,000 to Lisa's advocacy research. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, fluorescent lights humming overhead as we waited for Judge Patricia Morgan to review the case. Marcus sat with a new attorney, a young man who clearly hadn't done his homework. Eleanor and I sat calmly at the defendant's table, our evidence organized in neat manila folders. When Judge Morgan called the hearing to order, Marcus's attorney painted a picture of a confused elderly woman being manipulated by opportunistic advisors. He presented bank statements showing my donations to various organizations, my decision to renovate the garage into a community space, and my choice to hire a handyman to install security cameras throughout the house. Your Honor, he concluded, these erratic expenditures and paranoid behaviors clearly indicate cognitive decline requiring immediate intervention. Judge Morgan turned to Eleanor. Response. Eleanor stood, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she gestured to me. I rose from my chair, my voice clear and steady. Your Honor, I'd like to address these accusations directly. What followed was 15 minutes of the most articulate, comprehensive defense of my mental faculties I'd ever delivered. I walked through my volunteer work coordinating the museum's new digital archive project, my successful management of a $125,000 investment portfolio that had grown by 18% in the past year, and my systematic approach to supporting elder advocacy initiatives. Furthermore, I continued. The security cameras my son characterizes as paranoid were installed after I discovered his unauthorized access to my home and my private conversations. The donations he calls erratic are part of a carefully planned philanthropic strategy, one developed with my financial advisor. I reached into my purse and produced a thick folder. I have documentation of every decision, every expenditure, and every conversation that led to this moment. Additionally, I've brought character witnesses. Judge Morgan's eyebrows rose as Dr. Chun, the museum director, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, and 3 other professionals I'd worked with over the past months filed into the gallery. The hearing lasted 2 hours. When it ended, Judge Morgan didn't just dismiss Marcus's petition. She issued a restraining order preventing him from filing similar claims without substantial new evidence and appointed a court advocate to monitor any future attempts at guardianship. Have you ever watched someone realize they've underestimated you so completely that they've destroyed their own credibility? The aftermath of the court hearing created unexpected consequences. Word spread through Eleanor's professional network about the case, and I began receiving calls from other attorneys dealing with similar situations. They wanted to know how we'd built such a comprehensive defense, how we'd documented the manipulations so thoroughly. Within 6 months, Eleanor had established the Margaret Whitfield Protocol, a systematic approach to helping potential guardianship targets document their competency and expose financial manipulation. The protocol included cognitive assessments, financial audits, and legal documentation strategies that could be implemented before family conflicts escalated to court. My story became a case study, but more importantly, it became a roadmap for others facing similar battles. Marcus's response was complex. The court loss forced him into therapy, not by legal requirement, but by necessity. His reputation as a financial advisor had been damaged by the public nature of the proceedings, and he needed to understand how his protective instincts had morphed into controlling behavior. But here's what surprised everyone. The therapy helped. 6 months after the hearing, Marcus appeared at my door unannounced. Not with papers or legal threats, but with a handwritten letter and tears in his eyes. The letter was an apology, not the surface kind that asks for forgiveness without understanding, but the deep kind that acknowledges harm and commits to change. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where he'd once planned my legal diminishment, and talked for 4 hours. He told me about his own fears of losing control, his struggle with watching his father decline, his misguided belief that managing my life would somehow prevent the losses he'd already experienced. When did we start believing that love meant removing choices instead of expanding them? The garage conversion project had attracted attention beyond what Lisa and I had anticipated. What started as a thesis research space had evolved into something the local newspaper called a revolutionary approach to elder empowerment. The Center for Autonomous Aging, as we'd officially named it, offered legal workshops, financial literacy classes, and peer support groups for adults navigating family conflicts around independence. The workshops were led by professionals, but the real power came from the stories shared by participants. Women who'd fought off adult children trying to force them into assisted living. Men whose families had attempted to take control of businesses they'd built over decades. Couples dealing with one partner's cognitive changes while protecting the other's autonomy. Why do we assume that needing help in one area means incompetence in all areas? The center's success attracted grant funding from organizations focused on elder rights. Within a year, we were operating with a small staff and serving over 200 individuals annually. Lisa had graduated and become the center's first full-time director, her thesis having evolved into a program model that other communities were beginning to replicate. But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the confrontation in Eleanor's office, I received a call from the Illinois Department on Aging. A policy analyst named David Rodriguez wanted to visit the center and discuss our approach to preventing elder abuse. David arrived with a small team and spent 3 days reviewing our methods, interviewing participants, and examining our outcomes. What they found exceeded their expectations: a 94% success rate in helping people maintain their independence, a significant reduction in unnecessary guardianship proceedings among our participants, and a replicable model that addressed gaps in existing elder protection services. Mrs. Whitfield, David said during our final meeting, we'd like to propose incorporating your protocol into our statewide elder protection framework. We think this approach could help thousands of people avoid the situation you experienced. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very experience that had threatened to strip away my autonomy had become the foundation for protecting others' independence. Sometimes our greatest vulnerabilities become our most powerful tools for change. On the anniversary of that fateful airport day, I found myself back at O'Hare, not running from anything this time, but welcoming someone home. My sister Janet was returning from her own adventure, a 3-month art residency in Santa Fe that she'd thought she was too old to pursue. As we drove back into the city, she asked about the events of the past year. I gave her the condensed version, but what struck me was how different the story felt in the telling. What had once been a tale of betrayal and conflict had become a story of discovery and empowerment. You know what's interesting? Janet said as we pulled into my driveway. A year ago, you were rushing to catch a flight to my place because you needed somewhere safe to be. Now I'm coming to see you because you've created somewhere powerful to be. That evening, we sat in the transformed Garage Turn Community Center, surrounded by walls lined with resources, testimonials, and photographs of people who'd reclaimed their agency with the center's help. Lisa was there, along with Eleanor, Dr. Chen, and even Marcus, who'd become an unexpected advocate for financial transparency in family relationships. What if the thing you're running from is actually running you toward exactly where you need to be? As I write this final section, I'm aware that some readers might feel uncomfortable with certain aspects of this story. They might wonder if I was too harsh with Marcus, if family unity should have been prioritized over individual autonomy, if there were compromises that could have avoided the painful confrontation. But when did family harmony become more important than personal dignity? Why do we expect older adults to be grateful for help that comes with strings attached? At what point does protecting someone become controlling them? These questions don't have easy answers, and I suspect that's exactly why they need to be asked. Because the alternative, accepting that advanced age somehow disqualifies us from self-determination, is a surrender that affects not just individuals but entire communities. The Center for Autonomous Aging has taught me that my experience wasn't unique. The methods used against me, gradual assumption of responsibilities, documentation of minor forgetfulness, financial management disguised as assistance, are surprisingly common. What's less common is successful resistance, primarily because most targets don't know their rights or don't have the resources to fight back. What if every family had conversations about autonomy before they needed them? What if we approached aging with curiosity about what's possible rather than fear about what's inevitable? Today, 3 years after that pivotal airport day, the work continues to evolve. The center has expanded to include a legal clinic, a financial literacy program specifically designed for older adults, and a research initiative documenting family manipulation tactics and successful intervention strategies. Marcus has become an unlikely ally in this work. His professional experience with financial planning, combined with his personal understanding of how good intentions can become controlling behaviors, makes him an effective educator for other adult children struggling with similar dynamics. He speaks regularly at our workshops about the warning signs of overprotectiveness, the importance of asking rather than assuming, and the difference between supporting someone's decisions and making decisions for them. Redemption isn't about erasing harm. It's about using the lessons from harm to prevent others from experiencing it. Eleanor has written a guidebook based on our experiences titled The Margaret Protocol, a legal guide to maintaining autonomy in later life. It's become required reading in elder law programs across the country, and several states have adapted our documentation strategies into their official elder protection resources. Dr. Chen has established a cognitive assessment clinic that specializes in distinguishing between normal aging changes and actual impairment, providing the kind of nuanced evaluation that can prevent both unnecessary guardianship and missed opportunities for appropriate support. But perhaps the most significant change has been in my relationship with aging itself. Before this experience, I had unconsciously accepted the narrative that growing older meant gradually relinquishing control, that independence was something that naturally eroded over time. Now I understand that independence isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about maintaining the right to make choices about what you do yourself and what you delegate to others. It's about the difference between accepting help and surrendering agency. The security cameras that Marcus once characterized as paranoid are still there, but they're not symbols of fear anymore. They're tools that allow me to live confidently in my own space. The financial planning that he tried to take over is now something we collaborate on, with clear boundaries about what decisions are mine alone and what advice I'm seeking. True security comes not from being protected from all risk, but from having the resources to make informed choices about which risks are worth taking. This story doesn't end with complete resolution because the issues it addresses are ongoing. Every week, I meet people who are just beginning to recognize the patterns I've described, or who are in the middle of their own battles for autonomy, or who are working to rebuild relationships damaged by well-meaning overprotection. The Center for Autonomous Aging receives calls from adult children who are genuinely concerned about a parent's safety but want to avoid the controlling behaviors they've witnessed in other families. We've developed resources for these conversations too because the problem isn't caring about aging parents, it's the assumption that caring requires assuming control. What would families look like if they approached aging as a collaboration rather than a takeover? The questions I pose throughout this story aren't rhetorical. They're invitations to examine the dynamics in your own life and community. Because whether you're 35 or 75, whether you're the adult child or the aging parent, these issues will touch your life eventually. The airport that day feels like a lifetime ago, but I still think about that moment when I turned the car around for a document I thought I needed. I never did make it to my sister's cabin for Thanksgiving that year, but I gained something far more valuable, the absolute certainty that I could trust my own judgment, even when others questioned it. The will I went back for turned out to be exactly where I thought it was, in the desk drawer, perfectly safe. But the real inheritance I claimed that day wasn't money or property. It was the right to remain myself, fully and completely, for as long as I draw a breath. The silence in my house now isn't the silence of waiting or fear. It's the silence of contentment, of meaningful work being done, of a life being lived on my own terms. It's the sound of dignity preserved and autonomy reclaimed. Lisa still lives in the guest room, though it's evolved into more of a partnership than a housing arrangement. Eleanor stops by weekly for coffee and legal updates that often turn into strategic planning sessions for new advocacy initiatives. Dr. Chen has become a dear friend who challenges me to hiking adventures that surprise people half my age. Marcus visits regularly, but now he comes as a son, not a manager. We've learned to navigate the complex terrain between independence and interdependence, between confidence and humility. Our relationship is stronger now because it's built on respect rather than assumptions. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by relationships built on mutual regard rather than pity or control, I'm reminded of a simple truth. The most radical act we can perform is refusing to disappear quietly. The flight I never took led me exactly where I needed to be. Home, empowered, surrounded by purpose, and absolutely certain of my own worth. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth or inspired you to question dynamics in your own life, then it has served its purpose. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Carry these questions with you. And remember, your voice, your choices, and your dignity are never too old to matter. What flight might you need to abandon to discover your own strength? What conversation might you need to have to protect your autonomy? What assumptions about aging might you need to challenge in your own life? The answers to these questions might change everything, just like they did for me.